question, but having a look at our schedule, I think we first go to our last presentation, and then after that we can answer some more questions. So the last presentation will be given by T.S. Anna. She is an artist from Latvia and is part of the artistic research community in the north, from Groningen, the Netherlands. Her presentation will include artistic and philosophical views on the environment and nature connectedness, and how arts can be used to foster nature and connectedness by giving insights into her own project called The Forest. Please, Anna.
Thank you. I will share my screen now. Yes. Sorry. So thank you very much for having me. Thanks for inviting me and for the introductions. And today I would like to make a plea for not knowing. I would like to invite you to dare to leave this often too comfortable place in our minds, that of certainty. And maybe you wonder how does it connect to the theme of today? Well, let me tell you about ecological existentialism. This concept or idea comes from the anthropologist Deborah Bird-Rose, and she expresses it in a way that existentialism comes through mechanistic worldviews, dualistic thinking, and the death or absence of God. And it leaves humanity separated from the rest of the beings of Earth. And so, in us, it creates an existential loneliness. But what she does, she places ecological in front of it. And that way, she connects us back to the life of Earth. And that way, she breaks this isolation. And ecological existentialism brings together two major shifts in Western thinking, according to her. The first shift is that away from certainty towards uncertainty. And the other one is a shift away from atomism towards connectivity. So let me say a little bit about certainty. I think our desire for certainty, it seems to be growing ever stronger over time. And it has to do with the scientific discoveries over the past centuries, and of course the many rapid technological developments. And I will quote here, but paradoxically, the methods of certainty have uncovered fundamental uncertainties in the cosmos and within Earth. And there are many ways to look at certainty and uncertainty, and I will come back to it shortly. But for now, I would like to talk a little bit about connectivity. So in ecological science, connectivity refers to the exchange pathways, meaning that it carries energy, information, living things. And Bird-Rose emphasizes that the greater the number and complexity of these pathways, the greater the biodiversity. But on top of the energy and the information and the living things, she adds stories and songs and other forms of addressing. So in that sense, my talk today is about strengthening existing and creating new exchange pathways. And I think it is far more likely to happen from the position of not knowing. I mentioned uncertainty before, and I prefer to use the not knowing. And for example, Anke Kaalmans might call this artistic attitude, and there are many other ways how people call it. But for me, the difference is that in uncertainty, it seems as a state, a kind of abstract form of being. Then not knowing is a choice of activity. And please don't mistake it as a choice for passivity. I certainly do not want to argue for that kind of a numbness. I call these the don't know scapes, and I believe they require alertness and openness, but also a bit of planning. And in that sense, not knowing is not a kind of happy-go-lucky state. It may be, but it also invites to dwell in the uncomfortable, to listen attentively, and as Donna Haraway says, to stay with the trouble. In this active state, I think imagination grows and thrives. And I have no doubt in my mind that imagination is something that we need now more than ever to mend all these relationships that have been broken, or at least try to do that. And I'm an artist, so I will be talking about something I do know a little bit about, and it is I sometimes call it a project, but I must bite my tongue because it's more as a commitment. I do it together. I share this path together with Adrie Schokker, and it's something we started late in 2018. We call it the participatory process-led artistic research path. And I hope that throughout this presentation, you will grasp what I mean by that. Back in 2018, we got ourselves a drone for another project. And after we were done with this project, we didn't really know if we need it or not. And we brought it along on a very random walk in a forest or woodland close to Groningen. And I'm sure that many here, the scientists, but just as well as others, might recognize this fascination with the tools and technologies. And these can, range from a pencil to a microscope or a periscope or a camera or anything else that allows us to see something unseen. For us, for others, unseen metaphorically or literally. But back in the forest, we flied it around and shot some wonderful 4K video footage, and we came back home. We didn't really know it yet, but the forest had secretly recruited us. I will come back to it. But as we came home, as I said, video footage is not something that we work with much, and instead we tried to feed these images to a photogrammetry software to create a 3D model, and this is what came out of it. Something rather unusual, glitchy, and certainly not the forest that we were at and saw with our own eyes. I will explain a little bit later how we do these things. But I want to mention philosopher Vinciane Desprez, and she points out the necessity of researchers and ethologists in particular, because that's where her interest lies, not only to be interested in the animals that they are researching and thus making them interesting, but also making the animals interested in their research, thus making them interesting. Interest is not only a human affair, and a true interest in someone else requires to drop assumptions, to drop what we know or what we think we know. And these roles, of course, they change over time along the way. And just like a human researcher can recruit wild animals and make them interested in their research, the animals too can recruit the researcher. In this line of thought, I think the forest we went to recruited us. And as I was preparing for this talk and thinking about what we do and what drives us, I came to formulate a question that certainly makes me go and try to reach out to a tree or any other visible creature. And that is, how can I make a tree interested in the work and research that me and Adrie do? Or how can I interest a lichen or a fern or anything else? It is very likely that I won't get my answer, but I think posing that question matters because it serves as an open invitation to imagine and to speculate. And I suppose you might be wondering, what is a forest? And To give you a one-word answer, I would say it's an archive. Our archive has many parts. Some of them are accessible, others are hidden. And the many elements include photographs, 3D models, sounds, written, recorded, and told stories and conversations, and more immaterial components. And some of them come together in a virtual reality installation, at times with live music performances. And our archive is a growing and evolving one. It has similarities to a living entity. It is unpredictable and essentially unknowable. We are discovering it in its making. And there are many artists, of course, working with archives or archiving. And one of my favorite ones is Herman de Vries, a Dutch artist who lives and works in the Black Forest in Germany. You may have heard of his earth rubbings such as these. This is from an exhibition from last year in Berlin, bringing together 60 rubbings of earth from Europe. But he's also a philosopher and a poet. And certainly if I had to name one artist who can say something about connectivity, it would probably be him. And this poem that you can read here says a lot. His words then create several exchange pathways, testifying and reminding of the human groundedness and connectivity with and to the life on Earth. As the forest had interested us, we came along as scientists. I suppose many of you have heard of Suzanne Simard. She's a forest ecologist who lives and works in Canada. Well, certainly if you have heard of the mycorrhizal networks and the vast communication and sharing of nutrients below ground, you probably have heard of her work. Just a few weeks ago, her first book was published titled Finding the Mother Tree. As she describes her journey, she points out that, quote, I had learned so much more by listening instead of imposing my will and demanding answers, unquote. The similarities to what I call not knowing or the artistic attitude are very present. Vinciane Desprez would probably call this a posteriorist investigation, meaning that in her research, the focus is on verity rather than variation, bringing together not only disparate facts, but also facts that don't fit. And through this listening, Suzanne Simard heard the trees communicate, collaborate, and care for each other, revealing that the roots are organized in patterns very similar to our brains. Not only that, but also that they emit chemical signals identical to our human neurotransmitters. I think for us, for me and Adi, starting our forest path, seeing scientists and other people doing work like this with such an open mind steered us to see the complexities around us. And as we walk around the forests and woodlands in the places we visit, we are searching for something. And I can't really tell you what it is. It is something that captures our eye and causes a curiosity, as with this dead oak. On its carcass, several old nails stood out, nails from a very long time ago, the kind that are not produced now. Let me tell you a little bit how we do the scanning. It's a method called photogrammetry. It's as old as photography, but with the computing available nowadays, it's becoming more common. The way it works is the number of photos need to be taken from many different perspectives around the tree or around the dead oak, as in this case. Going around it in circles, stretching arms as high as possible and kneeling down to the ground makes it a sort of a ritual, a bowing to the tree if you wish. What you see here is a screenshot from the software we use to create the 3D models. I show it to illustrate how photogrammetry works. So you see the model in the middle. This is a small branch of lichens, and the small white dots around it are the photos taken. So it can end up being quite a lot of photos. In this case, it was about 12 to 1500, but of course it's not necessary. A 3D model can be created from as little as 60 photos, but the more detail one wants, the more photos, the more data is necessary. And weather too plays a part. So ideal conditions would be a cloudy day without direct sun and as windless as possible. However, we're not focused on quality, and at least not in this sense for our archive. If it is windy, the model shows it. If the person who scans it is detail-oriented, it will show too. So our archive is full of imperfections. And if one notices, the people who did the scanning are there too, with their own character and handwriting. And what you see here is the dead oak that I showed you before. This brings me to the next notion I would like to introduce you to, the becoming with. The becoming with is essentially open-ended encountering. And many thinkers use it, like the ones I mentioned already, like Donna Haraway, Deborah Bird-Rose, but also others. And to quote Deborah Bird-Rose, she says, living and non-living beings are mutually interdependent. Our lives are lived in connection. Each becoming depends on our relationships with other living and non-living beings. We become who we are in the company of others. We are not alone. Becoming with then means to embrace the ongoingness of life. I think this is what encounters are all about. Encountering other beings, human and not. As an example, I would like to use the Dutch artist Dan Karelse, as he reflects on his extensive art practice in terms of fieldwork. And he says that fieldwork is not just being outside, but it begins with radical exposure of the participants, their thoughts and their acts, and takes place under guidance of local inhabitants of any species. In these images, you see Town's field research test to try to experience floating like a seaweed. In the beginning, I mentioned the importance of not knowing for imagination, and to me, Town's work shows it so well. It's quite significant in this sense. It truly talks about the becoming with, in this example, but in general with his thinking and doing the field work. This example maybe shows a somewhat solitary artistic process, but Town emphasizes diversity in working with others from different fields, from different backgrounds, from different age groups to complement and to challenge each other. He brings together knowledge from arts, sciences, and ancient cultures. It's a becoming with through and through, I think. In 2019, myself and Adri did an artist residency in Eland Valley in Wales. And for many reasons that I don't have time to elaborate on now, it was a very transformative experience. Even though we went to forests and woodlands before quite often, the notion of fieldwork didn't really register with us before we went to Eland Valley. Exploring the environment for the sake of exploring it, not necessarily in a productive or effective way, became important. We have now named it walks and talks, and it's one of the ways where becoming with can happen, through how Town explains it, navigating an area under the guidance of local inhabitants. And usually we separate these encounters from interviews, so we don't make any recordings. The one you see here is with the lichenologist Ray Woods, as he's just about to introduce us to a tree in a tree in a tree, a double air tree, an ash tree and a birch tree and an oak tree. Quite magic, I would say. And so I come to the last chapter about turning toward. And I quote again Deborah Bird-Rose. She calls it an ethical practice that acknowledges histories of distance and disaster, and yet still seeks to be responsive to others' suffering and joy, and to others' life and death. Always situated in history and in relationship, turning toward seeks to mend relationships, to make worlds that are hospitable to life. Turning away is something that, in my opinion, we have been practicing for too long in Western culture. Turning away has relation to capitalism and consumerism. As we buy our food in supermarkets, we have broken a kind of connection. Using the words of Bird Rose, this distance provides an alibi. So, for example, I wasn't there when it happened. I didn't know it happened. I didn't see it. A blind eye to the many diverse sufferings and injustices of plants, of animals, and humans. Turning toward them is a counteraction to that. It's a motion towards encounter. It is a willingness to situate oneself so as to be available to the others. And this situating involves dialogue and it involves responsibility. I'm a part of the artistic research community in the North, and we are about a dozen artists who were brought together by Professor Anke Kouwmans back in 2019. And this last year, we have become a rather close community, and not knowing also has been a topic that we have explored and keep exploring and are now working towards events and a publication. But some of the thinking about it comes from them. But I would like to talk about one project of a fellow artist. She's it's Paul, printmaker, photographer, teacher, and researcher. And she is right now launching this project called Here-ness. And to me, it seems it's all about this turning toward. As the title suggests, she embraces the place, the village where she lives in the very north of Netherlands, and the people who live there. And using art as a catalyst, she questions what is here, and through that, what do people want to protect? And one of the things that she will do is inviting the people from the village to take photos of the landscape, answering questions. And the questions are quite open. For example, what worries you? What are you afraid of? But just as likely, what do you love? It's a village surrounded by farmland, a village with old-timers and newcomers from big cities. It is a close community, but as most communities, they too have conflicts and difference of opinions. And later this month, she's starting to bring people together at one table without putting them against each other. So Paul intends to bring topics or issues to the surface, but not to serve anything, but rather with this intrinsic motivation of creating wonder, as turning towards can do. And for a forest, we too hope to develop wonder. On the one side, wonder is in the sense of amazement. Once one is facing a tree or a lichen or any other someone for a while, one can't help but notice things that at other times might pass by as noise. Simply paying attention, looking closely. I mentioned before, one of the most important parts of a forest is workshops. And they are standalone events or during festivals or in the context of education. And in these workshops, a wide range of people come together, interested either in art, nature, or technology, or a combination. And during these workshops, participants are introduced to what we do and the tools we use. But in the second part, we ask them to reflect on their views, on trees, on forests, and then find something they want to scan, do some observation exercises, and make the photos. And I will show a few examples of this.
Yeah, Anna, we are running a little bit behind the schedule, so I must ask you to come to an end soon, please.
Okay, yeah. So I think in these forums, we ask people to reflect on what they see. And well, let me just give you one example. Or not what they see, what they think about a forest. So for example, Daniel writes, when I think about a forest, I understand that there are things much more important and wiser than me. I feel as a part of a big planet system. I think the trees know much more about me and my life than I know about them. Trees are wise. And I think I will skip the others and just jump straight to my conclusions. I want to make a few points. So I started by saying that it's important to be interested on one side and make others interested too. And we're artists, and a forest recruited us, and we're humbly hoping that through the workshops and the other things that we do, we recruit others in joining in this not knowing adventures, however they lead. But I also lack the words to express how much we need to become with others. Amidst these odd notions of certainty or even wishful thinking, it is far too easy to forget that we're not alone and that there are others to turn toward, not away from. I think I will stop here and just invite you to be interested, interest someone else, become with, and turn towards. Some artists do it, as I mentioned already, and I hope you will find it useful for you too. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for this very inspiring contribution to our Nature Connectedness gathering.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can't do the real connectedness projects without art. This was always the starting point of Science of the Bees. And I think to use art as catalyst to connect them, it works perfectly. And I really love your approach. So, are there any questions for Anna? You can just open your mic. And,
Okay, I have a question for Anna. And it connects to my name is Koji Veselius. I'm working for the province of Friesland. And I also helped Jan Willem with the bespoke application co-financing. My question is along the line from, as Frank Gaupers put it, I feel it more as a spiritual approach. But my own question earlier on is connected to how I call it the cynic politician can be approached. And I think art, reaching the heart, is a way. And I would like to ask Anna the question, whether the Hereness project in Hornhuizen, as presented and executed by Paul Taverne, if this approach also will include decision makers and politicians, and how she would consider to approach, yeah, well, let's call it the politician.
Yeah. I don't know for sure, but I know that Paul's intention is to specifically bring together people from the village. So the politicians who live in the village are the same people to bring in. But I think that she specifically wants to invite people to take more care, to take more responsibility on their views of their environment and what they treasure in it, what they are afraid in it, and to maybe take more ownership in it. So, because indeed, very often, I think it is not to blame anyone, of course, but it is politicians who make decisions for us. And I think that connection too needs to be restored. We all need to come closer to each other. So I think the politicians might be included, certainly, yeah, but I don't think that as a kind of a stakeholder group necessarily.
No. Okay. Thank you, Anna. As a reflection on this, the Cultural Capital of Europe year 2018 for Leeuwarden, Friesland, incorporated a project called Sense of Place. and the success of sense of place, in my opinion, ties in with what we are talking about here and the Hornhuisen experiment. So I would like to I thank you for bringing this up in this way. I will follow the work of ARC in the North and of Professor Anke Kouwmans and her students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And I must agree with Frank Gaupels that the not knowing approach is very interesting. I like it very much. And it's also helpful for politicians. Koji?
I agree. Yeah.
And also, my idea would also be to go to a place without big of thinking in advance and just look at the place. Maybe a few simple questions on a sheet of paper, maybe even provided by someone who will guide the tour, and just thinking about what is this place about and what does it with me, and maybe something like what kind of feelings do I get in this place. And this is very open-minded, and I think suitable for some people, maybe even younger people.
I agree, and we had a discussion with Danielle about that. And it's not necessary to go into nature. You can even go into your own surrounding and look at the trees and the gardens, and because people don't see it. It's their everyday life, and they don't know how to look anymore. So to connect them, you don't need to go out. You can just walk around your own apartment or living or whatever, and so
Yes, I agree.
The Hornhusen experience.
What?
The Hornhusen experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or remarks?
Well, I'm quite baffled about the amount of questions which pop up in my mind now, which I cannot ask because that would take like a lifetime, perhaps. So I think that is what is happening at the moment with all the other people who have questions. But I think it opened up a really nice additional way of looking at how to connect, and that's what this sense of place idea also envelops. You can do this everywhere. The problem in that sense is more for me as a cynical scientist. So how to implement that in the situations in which actually people would benefit the most. So not only the happy few who could go into the forest with an artist to learn how to look, but also all the kids who are in school for 13 years and who apparently do not know how to look afterwards. So that's a bit of a cynical approach and a bit overstated, but otherwise you do not get the message home. So I think that it's a really a feat if we could be able to interest the institutions into ways in which we would like to have people experience this way of looking at the world, and by that enhancing nature connectedness in the new project. So that's what I am thinking about, and with that I would like to give Jan Willem some last words perhaps for this meeting about how he looks at that.
Yeah, that's so. Just to make clear that the current funding program of Silence of the Bees will end at the end of September this year. We plan to start a 4-year follow-up period next year with more partners and with more focus on bee deals, on where we talked just shortly about a new art program, also collaboration, for instance, with bee totems and those kind of projects. So extended educational projects, and that what we learned from this meeting, but also in the coming month, we will deepen the education project with more nature connectedness. And that was the reason why we organized this symposium. So at least for us, it was very inspiring, and hope you had the same experience. And by the way, if you have any additional ideas for our new period of 4 years, please let us know, because we're still developing a new program. So there are still some questions in the chat which we didn't answer. We will come back to that. There are some. And also some of the presentations we are allowed to share. So we will send you a link where you can download them afterwards. And unfortunately, we have to go on because we will have another symposium today, and that's a youth symposium with kids. So they will make their own biodiversity action plan and hand it over to the politician from our province. So we're very curious what will happen. So I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to thank the guest speakers, but also our team for all the preparation of work, and of course all the participants. And if you have any questions or additions or whatever, just ask us or send us an email. And well, thank you, and I wish you a nice day the rest of the day. Thank you.